Representative Leisha Kozlowski. I use they, them pronouns. I am the co-chair of the Minnesota Posse Caucus and also the representative on the east side. I'm really grateful to be joined by my colleagues from the Duluth delegation and also from the Wisconsin side of the bridge. All eyes are on Minnesota and right here even in the Twin Ports for good reason. As you know, that for weeks more than 3,000 HSI, CBP, ICE agents, and others have flooded the state under what this administration is calling Operation Metro Surge. These are direct assaults on immigrants, communities of color, working class people, on our economy, and really our shared humanity, and that is why we're here today, united across the bridge, fighting for our communities. Mass federal agents who are cosplaying paramilitary tactics have disrupted our daily lives, are shutting down businesses, overwhelming our hospital systems, terrorizing immigrants and communities of color from border to border, trampling on constitutional rights of civilians. They're arresting even Native Americans, the most original Americans, illegally and violently interrogating and detaining us. Children arrested, families torn apart, communities terrorized. And just days after we were gathered right here in this room in the People's House for a historic first in 80 years general strike, immediately the federal government struck to take down another one of our community members, Alex Pretti, after Renee Good, Keith Porter, and many others have been taken at the hands of ICE. This violence is not confined to the Twin Cities, and that's why we're standing here today, and you'll hear a lot more from each of the members talking about the chokehold that this has in our communities, from Crow Wing County, where they have an ICE detention center, to Upper St. Louis County, where we've had Latino workers terrorized, to the detention center across the bridge in Douglas County, raids in the South Shore, and impacting our tribal nation. So every day, I just want to say to our neighbors who are standing up in the cold against these callous attacks, risking your safety and lives to protect community members, to document, de-escalate, and get ICE out, thanks to your community care and mutual aid, is standing between ICE and further harm and destruction. And state is here to say that we are going to be reinforcing. We will be talking about some of the plans and actions that we've been taking, and we'll be launching as well to get ICE out for everywhere for good. And so next up, I am honored to introduce to you our fellow state representative, assembly person on the Wisconsin side, but also a member of our national state legislators group that has banded together in collective effort to get ICE out everywhere. So take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just really appreciate the invitation to be here today. My primary reason for wanting to join this event is to stand in solidarity with my Minnesota colleagues as their state confronts an occupation by federal agents who are violating people's rights, putting people's lives in danger, and in at least 2 cases more, have directly led to the deaths of people who were simply exercising their rights. I stand with Minnesota because many of my constituents have deep roots in this state. Many work here, have family here or in the cities, or are transplants. And for all of us in this area, our nearest big city is Minneapolis. It's our city too. And I stand with Minnesota because I know Wisconsin could be next in terms of having one of our major cities occupied by a federal force. But I also want to call attention to what's already happening in rural areas. I represent the South Shore of Lake Superior. Aside from the city of Superior, my district is rural and remote, and people are being kidnapped from our communities too. Their families are being left behind, often far away from cities and the resources that cities can offer. But we're doing what we always do in rural areas. When our neighbors need help, we step up quietly, without any fanfare, in this case, totally under the radar, helping to pay bills to get people where they need to go. And it's not easy. People are being terrorized, and all of this is completely unnecessary. I also want to acknowledge that as the representative from Superior, that I represent the area with the Douglas County Jail, which has a contract with the federal government. The jail has had this contract for as far back as anyone can remember, since the 1930s. And that means that whenever the federal government needs to detain someone, they can contract with Douglas County. This is a long-standing contract, but conditions are clearly different now. And so I've had many constituents reach out to me to ask for review. And I want to say that I welcome that review. I think that they absolutely have that right. And if this moment has taught us anything at all, it's that we all need to take more responsibility for our democracy, and we need to ensure that transparency and accountability are the norm at every level of government. I've talked to the Douglas County Sheriff. He feels that the conditions in the Douglas County Jail, from his perspective, are better than they would be perhaps at these federal detention centers, but that doesn't mean that the public doesn't have the right for transparency, oversight, and accountability. So clearly, to anyone who thinks that this is about immigration enforcement, no one is standing in the way of immigration enforcement when it comes to violent criminals who are undocumented, who should have due process still, but should be deported if that's appropriate. That's not what's happening here, and that distinction, in case anybody is unclear, that distinction matters. We're seeing racial profiling leading to people being detained no matter their immigration status. We're seeing people who did everything right, everything legally, who are being detained and deported. And we're seeing those arrests happening in the most brutal, inhumane, and dangerous ways possible. None of this makes any of our communities safer. If the Constitution, our legal document that guarantees all of our rights and that protects us from our government, is going to mean anything at all, it has to apply to every single person. And this is not a radical concept, and it should not be a partisan position. So again, I'm happy to be here with my colleagues from Minnesota, and I will turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, I'm back again, and thank you, Representative. You know, as you know, I am a proud member of our Latino, Native, and trans community, and standing up here is really deeply personal, that these are not just neighbors, these are family members, community members. This could be myself, as we've heard many of our elected officials of color and immigrants standing up to risk safety, to risk everything at the fray. Folks who are joining who are not used to being political or getting in the sphere in any manner of the word, but because Minnesotans deeply care for each other. And we know that what we're witnessing here in Minnesota is not new, that this is just a playbook that is regurgitating itself as this nation was founded on stolen land, on stolen labor, on land dispossession and displacement. This is not something new to my family members who have been ripped apart at the hands of the federal government. But I will say that this government is messing with the wrong region. This is where the American Indian movement was birthed, where the George Floyd mobilization rose up, where climate justice and water protectors have reverberated across the world, and now we're rising up against this reign of terror. I also want to be really clear that ICE and these surge operations, as they call them, are deeply impacting Northlanders. I will tell you that I've accompanied Duluthians to the Whipple building for their immigration check-ins, in that piercingly scary moment of, is the person asking, am I going to be taken behind bars and detained and deported, or am I going to be able to go back home to my family in Duluth? Students who are calling from across the other side of the state saying, can you help me get a safe route home from college? I can't go through Alexandria or St. Cloud, where they've set up a checkpoint on the road. Brainerd and Crow Wing County and Itasca are working with ICE. Minneapolis feels precarious. How can I get home to Duluth? We've assisted Native Americans across the state who are being brutally interrogated and picked up unhoused relatives. Just this week, 2 more detainments occurred from the Standing Rock tribe and others. The most original people are being held at Fort Snelling, which is the Whipple building, which is the site of a mass burial grave, as well as our original genocidal camp. The ACLU of Minnesota has filed a lawsuit to protect legal observers, and I want to raise your attention, as Representative Stroud referred to at the Douglas County ICE Detention Center, that in that ruling, in that briefing, there is a story about a woman from St. Paul who was detained on her way to work. They took her up the route, Duluth to Superior, and they detained her there. She's diabetic, she needs life-saving insulin, and was denied medical care right here in our community. Our office has worked with rapid response teams across Minnesota and Wisconsin to make sure that folks are getting legal representation, medical care, interpreters to do things like DOPA forms so that folks who are detained can make temporary child custody plans for their children. Just yesterday, Senator McEwen and I attended a hearing right here at the federal building. We know that ICE lies. We've seen this across the state where they make assertions that these are criminals that are sex trafficking or that they're ramming vehicles, and I would just urge you to believe your eyes and not their lies. All those charges have been dropped. In many of those cases, the harm is already done. I also want to say lastly that the unseen heavy toll on our Somali, Native, Latino, and Asian communities is what grinds me the most, because it's maybe unseen to folks out here, but it is very much lived by us inside. Duluthians, 10 that I know of at least, who have been coerced by CBP and ICE to self-deport, not out of choice, but out of fear. And this is the reality. And so I am also incredibly proud of Northlanders, of Minnesotans who've risen up, demanding accountability against these reckless attacks and refuse to be silent. In partnership with immigrant communities across the state, just last week, was it? I can't keep the days straight. We hosted a constitutional observer training that had over 300 Duluthians getting geared up to be legal observers. We have mutual aid networks springing up in every network. We also hosted a roundtable for our immigrant and communities of color right here so that they have the tools to be equipped to protect themselves, but also are leading the way. And so look to our immigrant and communities of color. Over the last 24 hours, as we've been talking, that the news changed swiftly, but we are urging you to stay vigilant and stay alert, because just this morning, although Bovino and Nome and those are being demoted for their crimes against humanity, we know that Secretary Hegseth signed an approval for DHS to just retool their operations to house that in Fort Snelling, and for the agents to be housed there, and an increase in weapons and machinery. So we know that this will not end with simple reform. ICE is only 22 years old. It's here to protect power, to target and prey on people of color and immigrants, not protect us. And we won't end until these racist massive portions are over. I'll say that Minnesota has seen false springs, and so encouraging Minnesotans that we have to continue to stay scaled up, to have our hearts leading forward for our community, and to join us at the Capitol as state legislators fight back. We'll be bringing legislators in from all over the country this Thursday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. for an oversight hearing on ICE. We'll also be holding a press conference to unveil a slew of state-led as well as Posse Caucus-led actions. Already, the AG has launched our ICE database. We have gotten $3 million into the hands of immigration attorneys to support the onslaught of cases for immigrant communities, fighting for restoring schools, child care centers, courts, hospitals as ICE-free safety zones. Restoring dignity in hospitals. We're calling for a statewide eviction moratorium with rental assistance, support for our immigrant and BIPOC-owned businesses with grants and forgivable loans, prohibiting agents from wearing masks, from switching license plates, being able to sue them for the damages occurred, thanks to our AG, state, and counties who are fighting to investigate and charge and hold them accountable, which Senator McEwen will talk more about. And lastly, I will say that ICE is not law enforcement, and we are calling on every single community member aside the ACLU to encourage and demand that every single county sheriff cease your ICE contracts and do not sign a single one more. I'll end by saying I was humbled last night to join over a dozen folks from across northern Minnesota and Wisconsin around community care and ending ICE and grief and song and healing. And I was reminded that spanning from generations, I am you and you are me. I am you and you are me, and we protect each other. We move through grief and rage in song, but it has to be more than just the people moving their feet and hands in action. It has got to be our elected officials standing up. So together, let us make it so. Thank you.
Just want to start by saying thank you to you folks for coming out and covering this, and also to my colleagues for standing alongside us today. We keep hearing a bunch of different reasons why this is happening in our state. We've heard that it's about public safety. It's about getting the worst of the worst off of our streets. What they don't tell you is that the worst of the worst, many of those folks that they claim to have caught were already in our jail systems, were already in our prisons. What they are doing, if they were truly coming after the worst of the worst, they would be using judicial warrants, and they would be following the laws. They wouldn't be using children as bait. They wouldn't be going door to door asking their neighbors to point out where the brown people live. So then they said it's about immigration. It's about illegal immigration, and that is the problem. That is why they're here. We know that Minnesota is ranked in the bottom half for what people call illegal immigrants. If it was about that, they wouldn't be here either. But we know it's not about that. We know if it was really about that, the folks in Washington, D.C. would be working on and passing comprehensive immigration reform so that we have an immigration system that works, not the one that has been broken for decades. Then we heard that it was about fraud, right? They are sending these people here because there's fraud in Minnesota. If it was about fraud, they'd be sending forensic auditors and accountants to help root out the fraud and hold those people accountable. Not thugs in masks, breaking down doors, busting windows, and creating chaos in our streets. Operation Metro Surge is not just focused in the Metro, and I think that's a tactic that they use. This is happening all around our state. It's not about any of those things. It's not about public safety. It's not about immigration. It is not about fraud. It's trying to make an example of Minnesota. It's trying to bully Minnesota into giving over our voter rolls, about giving over our Medicaid rolls. And they did make an example of Minnesota, but I don't think it was the example they intended. To the folks that look like me, white skin, blue collar, now is the time to use your voice. Now is not a time to stay silent and go on with your day. Be an Alex Pretti. Be a helper. Use your voice to protect your neighbors. Staying silent isn't going to allow this to pass over. What is happening is fundamentally ripping at the core of who we are as a society, and it impacts every single one of us. To those of you that are in public safety, my fellow firefighters, my EMS partners, law enforcement, I know like me, many of you took an oath. And while our oaths may look a little different depending on the profession or the agency that we work for, I have no doubt some of the similar core tenets remain: to protect and uphold the Constitution, to serve our communities with bravery and courage. And I would ask every one of you to look at what is happening on our streets through that lens and tell me if they are upholding the oath that you took. Because our ability to do our jobs is predicated on trust. When somebody calls for help, they trust that people are going to show up to their doors to help them. That is the only reason we are able to do that work. And what is happening in our streets right now is shattering that trust that many of us have spent our careers building. I am so unbelievably proud of my fellow Minnesotans who showed the country and the world what it means to stand up for our neighbors and love and fight for people that we may never meet. This isn't over. And while they tried to make an example here in Minnesota, they will go somewhere else, and we will keep standing up and fighting back. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today and for coming to this talk, and with your questions. We'll take questions after this as well. And I want to thank my colleagues who I work with here as part of our Duluth legislative delegation down at the Capitol. Truly tremendous people, and I'm so lucky to be able to partner with them, and so delighted also to be making this connection with a representative across the harbor as well. I'm State Senator Jen McEwen. I represent Duluth in the Minnesota State Senate. I'm the chair of the Senate Labor Committee as well. I think what I'd like to add is just a short thought before we take some questions about enforcement. And what I'd like to sort of ground us in some of the comments as we were hearing my colleagues speak, one of the things I really want us to get grounded in is how horrific these assaults on our communities have been. We use words like detained, but we all know, any of us who have been in situations where we've seen this sort of brutality occur, detained means often that someone is violently attacked. They may have had their car window smashed in while they were sitting inside it. They may have had pepper spray sprayed into the vent of their car to try to smoke them out of it. They may have been violently yanked, their seatbelt cut out of their car. They may have been tackled violently on their sidewalk, in the street, in their own neighborhood, in front of their house. They may have had their door violently broken and kicked open. So the people that end up detained, that's not pretty. It's violent. It's a disgusting practice. And it should be reserved only for instances where that type of violence is absolutely necessary to take into custody someone who lawfully has to be taken into custody. What we have been seeing is absolute unlawfulness on the part of our federal government. On top of the unlawfulness, we have seen outright lies. Lie after lie after lie. I would like to say that those of us who have watched the political progression of the administration that is in power right now, that regime that is in power right now, it should be no surprise to us that this culture of rank lying, bald-faced lying to the public is just part and parcel of what this administration, what this regime stands for and how they roll. The buck stops at the top. So as we heard, this is not over at all. We have seen some encouraging developments over the last day, which are good, some pulling back, some perhaps key leaders within the regime being demoted. I don't even know actually for what reason they're being demoted yet, right? Maybe it's just because they started to make the administration look bad because they were being so brutal. But it seems to me they were following orders from the top. So what I would like to see as we go forward and we continue to face down this brutality in our state and across the nation, I would like to see our local officials at every level take the reins in investigation, take the reins in charging criminal behavior, and then charging when it is appropriate to charge, actually carrying through those charges, taking people under arrest, having them go through the court system, have their due process like anybody else who would be charged with a crime. We have seen with our own eyes what appear to be assaults, murders, false imprisonment, property damage, outrageous felony-level property damage, disorderly conduct at a level of also felony-type disorderly conduct, to get to the point where we have people in our community here in the Northland who are afraid to leave their homes, who shelter in fear, who need people to bring them their groceries, who are afraid to go to work, afraid to go to school. It can't continue like that. So I am encouraged by those local officials, county attorneys, law enforcement agencies at the Minnesota state level, at the county level, who are deciding we can't count on the federal government anymore, clearly. We are going to investigate these crimes ourselves. We're going to gather evidence, and we are going to charge when appropriate. I think that our counties around the state and law enforcement around the state need to take that example and go with it. Yeah, I think I'll probably leave it there, and we'll go ahead and take questions now. And I'm sure there's so much to say in regard to what's happening in our state right now. And I guess I will just leave my comments to say that I also am encouraged in the fact that in this outrageous oppression that we have been experiencing as a state, we have seen amazing solidarity and amazing coming together in community. If those of us who have been really watching to see neighborhoods in Minneapolis where those neighbors now know each other so well, they hear that ICE is on the block and they come out of the houses, they have whistles, they're there to protect and observe what's happening, to see what ICE is doing, to bear witness to it, to record it. And they've been offering aid to people across the city, and we've seen that kind of solidarity and community here in the Northland as well. So hopefully that will keep building. I encourage people to keep on with those efforts, get connected to the rapid response networks, find out where you might fit in best in terms of how to build that community. There's lots of things that need to be done. One of the things I heard the other day was to get to know your neighbors. I think it was Rep. Kozlowski who said this the other day. If you don't know who your neighbors are, the people who live right around you on your block, go out there and introduce yourself. Make sure you know their names, get their phone numbers, make sure they know you, make sure they know how to contact you. Let's keep building community out of this tragedy and onward. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and take questions.
You all touched on this a little bit, but I was hoping you could maybe speak more directly to the specific impacts you've seen on folks in Duluth and in Northland. I mean, have you seen ICE activity up here, or is it more the theory you all talked about, like people are being afraid to go outside, being afraid to come home from college? Can you just talk more, a little bit more directly about what you're hearing from constituents and folks in the Northland?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and just say, like I shared in the remarks, those are all very real impacts from Duluthians and folks up here in the Northland who are having to make trips to the cities. You know, people love to go down to our Latino and Asian grocery stores, and right now there's a whole network of people who are saying, hey, when are you making a run? Because there's no way that I'm leaving my house, let alone getting in the car and driving that line down the road. To, like I said, international students and students of color who are either here in our community or traveling around the region, we know that ICE, CBP, HSI, whatever name that they're using, that they're cross-deputized to be able to go out and do enforcement removal. And so I think that's one of the things that's been incredibly concerning, and where, you know, we're all coming from an extreme collective gun violence trauma, but also for us as colleagues, for Speaker Melissa Hortman to have been gunned down by somebody pretending to be law enforcement. And so, you know, when we have agencies out there using unmarked vehicles, switching plates, masked, and with guns, and we don't know which agency, or if they're a bounty hunter, or if they're even law enforcement, or if they're ICE or CBP, I think has made it incredibly challenging. But I just want to also point out that we have an incredible rapid response network right here in Duluth at the Twin Ports Rapid Response. Their number's 218-213-5009, by the way. Remember that. And they're out there commuting, they're patrolling at our schools. We know that ICE has been running up and down the south shore of the border, raiding in Representative Stroud's district. We had a detainment by CBP and ICE up in Virginia, and so we know that they're definitely here in the county and operating.
And I would also add that we've fielded elected officials here. I know I have fielded at least a couple of instances where people were feeling that they were being harassed. And part of the issue with ICE, again, ICE is not law enforcement, right? ICE handles the enforcement of what are civil proceedings within our immigration system. However, because the way that they have been conducting themselves in these unmarked cars, masked, oftentimes not identifiable at all, switching license plates. There is a lot of confusion around if people are feeling that they're being harassed or followed, or there's a person who is around who looks like an ICE agent, they are rightfully alarmed. And I have fielded those concerns and complaints from constituents in Duluth this last couple of weeks. And I believe those people have made complaints to the Duluth Police Department. So I would encourage the press to follow those developments if there are any developments in that regard. But that is part of the issue. And it also is part of why I really encourage our law enforcement agencies, true law enforcement, our police, our sheriff's departments, county sheriffs, to really draw a hard line between what they do and how they do it, and what ICE is doing and how we have seen how ICE has conducted themselves. We have seen that from some agencies from law enforcement in the cities. They actually held a press conference recently to talk about how some of their people were even being racially profiled when they were off duty by ICE. And so they were experiencing firsthand what the public was experiencing, and they were really upset to see people who were presenting themselves as law enforcement to be committing these abuses on the public.
Oh, I'll also say that we know that the tribal nations, many have moved to ban ICE from their borders and are equipping our members as well as descendants to get your tribal ID or certificate of degree of Indian blood, which is really insane that we have to live in a country in a state of time where community members are walking around with their passport. I mean, I have mine on my tribal ID cards with me at all times. Members are moving about, and that is wrong. And even if you have your card, we know that that's not saving you, whether you're here in our county or across the bridge or traveling throughout the state. We know that ICE has tried to get onto our tribal borderlands as well. And so they're all over, and what we can just say is, like, that's why we need them out, because the impacts are so severe. And I could talk to you all day about the impacts here in Minnesota, our tribal nations that share geography.
I'll say quickly that one of my great concerns about this moment is what comes next. Insofar as if people have a growing lack of trust in law enforcement, we spoke about trust, that's critical. We all agree that violent people who put public safety at risk need to be contained and dealt with due process by our legal system. But we're creating now this distrust of law enforcement, which is deeply and profoundly unhelpful, especially for those communities most marginalized. And so I just talked to Chairwoman Boyd at Redcliffe. I heard people saying they thought there was ICE activity, and she confirmed, no, this was a U.S. Marshal coming on a warrant for someone. But you can see how that then becomes really dangerous and problematic when we can't parse. So this idea that this is about violent criminals, it's actually undermining our law enforcement's ability to do their job of keeping our communities safe, at the same time that there are going to be lasting effects. And this needs to stop now for that reason. All of us are committed to public safety. And if we continue to get this wrong, as we already have, we are going to deepen people's resentments and cynicism toward law enforcement, who some communities really need law enforcement to get it right. I mean, we all do, but some communities are particularly vulnerable. And so the stakes are enormous, not just for this moment, but for going forward.
Certainly over the past few weeks, we've seen, such a divide of reactions from the federal level, from the state level, from you folks, from Republicans. In the past few days, there have been a few Republicans breaking with the federal administration, speaking out. I wonder if any of you have had some of those conversations across the aisle with your colleagues.
I have not, but yeah, it is encouraging to see some folks actually finding that courage to use their voice and say, this is wrong. And I hope that it doesn't take more people getting killed in the streets for more people to realize how wrong it is. And that's what it will take. I've gotten not necessarily colleagues reaching out, but I've gotten constituents reaching out that have said that they have been conservatives their whole lives, and they will never vote for a conservative candidate ever again. This destroyed their trust in what they thought their party stood for. And it's going to take those people standing up to those elected officials to move them. We all represent our districts. That is our whole job, is to represent the people that live in the district with us. And if those folks are not doing that, they need to be held accountable by their voters.
And I'll just say, like, you might be a bit surprised that I have some strong ties with our Republican colleagues, some of who have come out and doubled down in support of the unconstitutional and just the destruction. But as we've seen, the Republican gubernatorial candidate dropped out of the race, citing that they just cannot stand for these kind of attacks on Minnesotans and humanity. We've also been encouraged, some of our House members have been recently posting that, they've made calls that it's not necessarily folks who are getting to Twitter and X or whatever it's being called these days and inking a post, but making calls and having conversations in the background. And as we saw the president actually calling Governor Walz yesterday, he said for a 10-minute phone call, we'll see what, if anything, that actually shifts. But I think we're hearing, and because we represent, especially you, out in a lot of Republican areas, that there's people who are reaching out to our office because they don't have anybody out there fighting back and protecting them. And so our federal delegations, we're telling them every single day, we're on the phone with them, like, do not give them another cent. And in fact, this is beyond reform. This isn't about officers or agents that are not trained. They aren't making mistakes in looking at passports and documentation. This is on purpose, and I just think Republicans can't keep glazing over their eyes, and we're seeing them coming forward. But we need at the House at least one Republican with moral courage and clarity to be able to vote and pass the legislation, which is why it is imperative on us to use every single legislative and executive lever at local, state, and county levels, because they are roadblocked there.
I would just add real quick to that, we've reached this really emergency critical point right now. I think that what we've seen this last week is this realization by many people that this is not about like a spectrum of politics. Are you on the left? Are you on the right? Are you conservative? Are you liberal? What's your political ideology? We now have a fascist federal regime in power terrorizing Americans. That is what this is. It's not conservatism, which I have a lot of respect for, actually. This is fascism. And true conservatives, I think we're seeing in Minnesota and around the country, start to really recognize and say, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I voted for. This is not what I was thinking when we elected this person into the presidency and when we saw his appointments into positions of power. So I hope that will keep going. I hope we're going to see more people realizing that it's wonderful for us to have policy debates. That's what a democracy is all about, what it should be about. But what we're seeing now is that's not it. That's not it at all.
Just to underscore that, we shouldn't be debating the legitimacy of the Constitution.
Right.
That is the foundational, fundamental text that we all took an oath to. We took an oath to the federal Constitution and our state constitutions when we took office. And I just want to remind the voters, we work for you. So anyone who is not finding their own courage based on their oaths, help them find their courage. Because one thing scares politicians who don't treat their oath as sacred as I know we do, and that's you, the voter. Call, 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 demand meetings, demand that they reinforce the sanctity of the Constitution and show that with their actions. And this moment is really, really critical. If we don't defend the principles of constitutional order now, what will stop future escalation? This is the moment. So I'm just asking voters to please remember that we work for you, and it's time to stand up as much as you possibly can. I just want to say the images out of the Twin Cities has just been so heartening, and one of the most crushing things about the murder of Alex Pretti the next day was that it changed that story. Let's never forget the story of what we saw on Friday. And let's make Alex's life a testimony to that courage and that desire for all of us to stand up and take care of each other. So, thanks.
Can I just add one thing that I was thinking about? I know. One of the things that I had been thinking about in regard to the absolute slander and attempted character assassination that the administration, the federal administration, tried to levy against Alex Pretti and also Renee Good. I hope that, as we have seen now, all of their friends and family and neighbors and community come out and say, no, actually, these people are amazing, loving, kind people, family people, community people, people involved in caring for others all the time. Nothing could be further from the truth. I hope that people who were believing the administration previously, when they made these false assertions that they were going after the worst of the worst, that they're only going after people who actually need to be deported, or that the people that they're encountering and taking into custody somehow were violent or deserved it, go back and question all those assumptions. Because I think we have seen in stark reality over these last 2 weeks just how willing they are to lie and lie and lie. So don't assume, I don't think that we can assume that anything that they are telling us has any grain of truth to it. And I really encourage the media and the public, if you had assumed that maybe because they were in government and they held these official positions, that when they issue a press release or an official statement that adds some grain of truth, I don't think you could assume that anymore. So I hope people won't be.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you for coming
everybody.
out.
Yes, that'd be great.
Thanks, you guys.